Special Operations, Covert Ops, Espionage, The Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Hey guys, welcome to the Team House. This is episode 105. I'm Jack Murphy here with co-host Dave Park, and our guest tonight is Jade Parker. Jade worked as a contractor supporting Joint Special Operations Command, doing cyber operations directed against ISIS, amongst many other things that we're going to get into tonight, including some of her research on extremist groups. And this is going to be a really interesting episode. Jade comes from a totally different perspective than many of the guests we've had on, doing a totally different type of operation than many of the people we've had on. So, Jade, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And, well, Jade, you know what the first question is, right?
Is this my origin story?
That's right. Correct.
All right. Let's see. So I'm originally from Bismarck, North Dakota. I went to boarding school on the East Coast at Phillips Exeter Academy. I graduated a year early. When I was 17, I went directly to study law at the University of Edinburgh. I did my first 2 years at the University of Edinburgh, and then I did my third year at McGill in Montreal. And I actually didn't go to law school wanting to be an attorney, unlike everybody else. What I really wanted to do was law reform. So law reform to alleviate conditions of extreme poverty through, institutional changes. So during my summers and, the part-time jobs that I had while I was in law school, it was mostly reforming laws for developing countries, on behalf of the World Bank or the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or different countries in Africa. And then in my last year, I was hired by Baker McKenzie, which is a big international law firm. And I was in their Ho Chi Minh City office doing law reform on behalf of the Prime Minister's Advisory Council on administrative law reform. So basically what we were doing was helping the Vietnamese government transition from a command economy to a more open market economy.
Non-communist.
But what?
Non-communist.
Well, no, still very communist, just less paperwork. Which, yeah, I wish that I was kidding. But basically, it took so long. I lived there and I worked there on and off for 2 years. And through the first year, it was just a lot of negotiating with these various, ministries and kind of getting people to talk to each other and trying to get them to figure out which circulars and various things they didn't need, right? Because one of their big problems was that one ministry would issue a circular about something, right? And so from the Ministry of the Environment, right? And then another ministry would say, totally contradict that, right? But they're at the same level. So it totally just created absolute chaos within their system, by getting, sort of figuring out what are the problems and then, getting that through then into a new format, that's everything goes together, and then waiting for that kind of stuff to be legislated on. It took forever. It was a very long process. And so for a while, they didn't really need me to do any more of the the legislative drafting and things like that, or talk to the ministers and stuff. So what they did was they put me on our white collar crime and anti-corruption unit, which I loved, and which was basically kind of a game changer for me, because like I said, up to that point, what I wanted to do was alleviate conditions of extreme poverty, but not by aid, but through structural changes. But then I got really into the anti-corruption, because what happened was they brought us all into this room, and I thought, oh, this is exciting, and they're like, okay, we have 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, we don't have to work on this anymore, and we either succeed or we don't. And basically what it was an international anti-corruption case. And the Department of Justice had worked on it for a while. And then they couldn't figure out, they knew that there were definitely crimes going on, but they couldn't collect the evidence because these people were very, very smart. I mean, they were fairly, I wouldn't say they were sophisticated, but they were definitely creative. And so what DOJ did was, sort of passed it off to PricewaterhouseCoopers, to their forensic accountants. And the forensic accountants, did everything they could to try to figure out how they were doing this with the numbers. And PricewaterhouseCoopers didn't have much luck either. And so then they tossed it to us as kind of like a Hail Mary type thing. Just be like, oh, well, let's see what, the lawyers can do with, kind of like the digital discovery stuff. So because they had loaded everything into these computers that, we were searching through all the emails, like there were tens of thousands of emails. Right. And it turned out that what they were doing was they were using a code in their emails, but like a linguistic code. And no one was looking at it because a lot of the people who were working on this were from, the United States, or they had Western backgrounds. And so what they saw is kind of just like a really cheesy, thing to add within your emails, when they're talking to each other, actually turned out to be super important. And so I figured out how they were doing it within 4 days.
Can you tell us a little bit about like how you found that? Like what did you notice? That's really interesting.
Well, I studied quite a few languages. At the time, I was really I briefly, before I went to law school, I studied in Beijing, and I also worked in Beijing. And I actually worked in Beijing so I could get enough money to backpack across China, Tibet, and Nepal by myself. And so I'd also studied Tibetan, and I wanted a chance to use my Tibetan when I was in Tibet. So I was staying with, monks and stuff. So, and when I was in Vietnam, I made a point to take Vietnamese every morning for about 2 hours before work. Although it turned out that I was actually taking Vietnamese lessons for some reason in their government weather bureau, which I didn't realize till like several months into it, because a friend of mine came to pick me up for lunch and was like, "Why are you wandering around the weather bureau?" Good question. I don't know. So I was very, I was very attuned to different kind of cultural sort of nuances, stuff that is just very unusual. And this to me was very unusual. And the thing is that, I'm not a mathlete, right? I would be terrible in the forensic, accounting unit at PricewaterhouseCoopers. Like they're, significantly better off without me just sort of like mucking around, and, the DOJ has very sophisticated investigative tools, right? So like what could these people possibly be doing that, these great people can't figure out how they're doing it, right? And it's got to be something very obvious, because most people are not that sophisticated. But if they are creative enough, they can go sort of outside the box. And that's really what my strength is and has been for, a long time. Like I'm not a very fast runner. I would never do very well in, the Special Operations Command, like in terms of, being boots on the ground or doing whatever, I'm just not, but I am very creative. And so that deviousness, I guess, was very helpful. Very much got into the after I did that sufficiently impressed my boss, who is the partner for anti-corruption white collar crime. And then she was like, "Okay, well, we're not letting you go." And I was like, "That's okay. I really like these, cool meetings where we go in and like shut the room and we can't tell anyone what's going on," which was totally unnecessary. But at the time seemed very cool. So I continued doing the anti-corruption and I did a lot of anti-money laundering as well, and a little bit of the countering terrorist financing stuff, but not particularly a lot. So I did that kind of thing. I also did insider threats, mostly detection. What else did I do? Yeah, so I did that for several years, and then I got I had a brief period of some family stuff. So I had to stay home for a little while to help my mom take care of some stuff. And so while I was there, I had time to do a little bit of, like reading and stuff. And so, because I'm very nerdy, and a lot of the stuff that I was dealing with was very heavy. So I got really into a lot of, autobiographies that people wrote from, JSOC or from CIA or from various, places in the intelligence community. And I really thought that was cool. And I thought, oh, look, I can use my, languages. And then for a while I thought, oh, I will apply to the CIA because I can use my languages. And everyone kept asking me, kept telling me, people who did not work for CIA, you should go work for CIA. And I'm like, well, I think that maybe if everyone thinks I should work for CIA, that's probably not great. But anyway, so I sent in an application, and then I got the response, and then I was so nervous because at the time you had to write an essay. And I was so nervous. I was like, oh, I'm not good enough for this. I'm going to wait a while, and I'm going to, brush up on my languages, which never really happened. I just sort of accumulated additional languages rather than improve my Vietnamese or whatever. And so that never really panned out. I don't know. I sort of, for a while, I was at the University of Minnesota taking graduate courses in political psychology. So I was studying basically the psychology of mass persuasion because that's what I was really, really interested in. I helped teach a seminar on propaganda and persuasion, and I ran the media, the media research lab. So it was the intersection of the Department of Psychology and the Department of Political Science, and then also working with the Department of Communications. And let's see, after that, I don't know. I sort of made my way into, getting a lot more into the terrorism stuff. And I thought, oh, well, one thing that I know that I need to improve upon is my math ability, right? Because like I said, I would not do very well with the forensic accountants at, PricewaterhouseCoopers. And at the time, I still wanted to go into, I was still doing, the anti-money laundering and stuff like that. And so I thought, okay, I will go to get a master's at Georgetown in finance. And that was probably, I don't know, it was a terrible decision on my part. I'm all about, let's improve, your weaknesses and stuff like that. But really at a certain point, the weaknesses are not going to improve. But it was really, so I didn't understand really what was going on. Everybody around me was an accountant, or like someone who worked at a bank and dealt with numbers all the time. I mean, really very impressive people, but I didn't know what was going on. It was boring. And I was terrible at it. So when we had to do homework and stuff, I had a tendency to procrastinate, as some people also might empathize with. And so what I did was I went on social media, because Georgetown basically strongly recommended that we get a Twitter account. And I had never been on Twitter before, at all. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. And they're like, you should follow financial news. And I was like, okay, I'm going to follow financial news. So while I was following my financial news, I was also then like, oh, look, these people are, interested in some of the same things I'm interested in. Oh, look, oh, this is cool. Look at this, talking about propaganda and terrorism and, and social media. And so in order to not do my finance homework, I thought, oh, well, I have some experience in this, and I can speak Arabic, which was a language, like I said, I sort of collected a few more languages. And so I studied Arabic. So I thought, oh, maybe I can do something. So, here I go, just sort of cruising around like pretty much anybody. And I went over to Telegram, which is where they were also. They just moved to Telegram, or maybe they moved in a couple of months. But yeah, so then I went over to Telegram, and I got really interested in their cybersecurity. so they had this little outlet, and it was in English, and it was also, I don't know, supporters, and I thought, there's got to be a way to, kind of exploit this, not so much from the perspective of, the really elite hackers, or, NSA or something like that, but there's got to be a way, to turn this against them.
You're talking about the social engineering aspect.
Right. Yeah. Because I thought, well, I'm sure that people are, doing that at these government agencies and stuff like that. But it seems like maybe I could contribute something to it. Not that I was some like elite hacker or something like that. But I have a tendency to learn things very quickly. And the problem solving aspect is what I really like, and the creativity. And so I went to a friend of mine who at the time was in a leadership position in human operations at DIA. And I said, I basically told him about, the ISIS, cybersecurity stuff. And he was like, all right. So then I went and spoke to somebody else. Anyway, moving on. But somehow at some point, I got involved in, I guess, the kind of the targeting of the technical people, which wasn't exactly what I had in mind. Although, I come from a military family. So, my dad was in the Army. My grandfather was also in the Army. He was on Lyndon Johnson's Security Council, actually. My other grandfather was a Marine in China during World War II. My grandmother's brother was a colonel in the OSS. So that kind of stuff doesn't bother me. And so, but I wasn't really, thinking that much really about it. One of the things that really, I really liked it. I really thought it was a very nice, it was a really fun challenge. And I don't know.
So for my clarification, because I'm amazed. You're just kind of throwing this stuff off so casually. But while you were going to grad school for finance, you get a Twitter account and you start following ISIS. Like you find out you start following ISIS members on there, or you start like.
No, I wasn't following ISIS members. I was following basically the nerds who follow terrorism.
Okay.
Which I am now, one of their ranks. But at the time, it was very informative because it was not really in my wheelhouse to talk, social media and stuff like that. When I came from, anti-money laundering and kind of this, financial crime type stuff. Although, like I said, there was a period of time where I had a lot of downtime for reading and stuff that I had gotten into terrorism and terrorism research. And counterterrorism and military stuff. But yeah, but the thing is, they were on there, right? Like they're going, around and at the time they were not really being, taken off social media. They were just sort of there, in English, in various languages. But I was particularly interested in the Arabic speaking ones because the other ones just seemed sort of moronic,
And then you followed ISIS over to Telegram, and then monitored them there too.
Well, I wasn't really monitoring them.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of sort of I wouldn't say confusion, but maybe purposeful conflation, I guess. That people think that they go on Telegram and they're sitting in these ISIS fan group things, and all of a sudden they're a super secret spy. That's not, well, first of all, that was not really what I was doing anyway. But it was also not how I thought at the time. I was just, kind of interested in what was going on. But yeah, but at that point, then I found the cybersecurity stuff. And as soon as I found the cybersecurity stuff, I downloaded everything from the English and the Arabic that they'd ever written, that they had written on cybersecurity, and everything that they had advised for cybersecurity. I downloaded all of it, and I downloaded, various apps and not their apps, but apps that they had recommended to see, why they particularly would have chosen these apps
and how they work.
So that was a period of, kind of very intense, immersion in their cybersecurity world.
So how did you parlay this into an actual job? This is what's fascinating about all of this.
Well, I'm not entirely sure. I was doing, some of this research, and I was sharing my, research findings. And like I said, I had spoken to my friend at, DIA, and he had sort of shuffled me over to a different area. And so, but I still sort of considered myself kind of like an analyst, not an intelligence analyst, but like a terrorism, analyst. And then I got the opportunity to, there were some people who were very interested in the technological side of Islamic State. And not so much from like, NSA in sense of, we're going to like hack these people. It was more like, we need, someone who can, speak to them in their own language, but also speak to them in their own language in terms of technology. And a lot of times those are not skills that are in one person, a lot. Either you have people who are very, very sophisticated, far more sophisticated than I am, in cybersecurity. And, maybe they don't speak, a foreign language. Or maybe, they don't like this kind of stuff, or, whatever. It's, kind of a weird package. Particularly, I don't really look like someone who's particularly imposing, right? So yeah, no, I don't know. I just sort of fell into the whole thing. And then people thought I did very well targeting. I mean, we were targeting this isn't like, what the FBI does with, their, what are their informants, I guess. They just sort of, sit in those, channels and stuff. But we were targeting actual people on the ground in Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan, and, different parts of Europe, but people who actually posed a very significant threat in terms of not so much their hacking ability, but their support for various things, using their expertise to facilitate external operations and using their expertise to facilitate their media operations. And so it was through that I then got into supporting the activities against Islamic State media and Islamic State external operations. And when I say that, there's a bit of external operations is a lot of times sort of conflated by people on the outside, in that anyone who does an attack, like externally, is involved in external operations. Even people who are on the ground in Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan and, the Philippines or whatever, if they're orchestrating an attack overseas, then it's automatically an external operation. But insofar as the Islamic State is concerned, there's actually two sort of different dynamics, and two sort of different roles, I guess. So there's the one role where you have these guys who are more like, I don't know, like media personalities, kind of. They get to go in the magazines, in the videos, and they're online, so people can just like talk to them. So here's this guy who, it's kind of neat if you're, a fan or something, and you're reading these magazines, and then you see this guy who's in them, and, and he's taking an interest in you, and then he, tries to get you to attack Europe or wherever you're from.
That's how it starts. First goes from, hey, Habib, how you doing? Want to auction off some slaves? And the next thing you know, you're committing external terror ops.
Yeah.
Kids these days.
I mean, I think that people, I'm fairly confident people knew what they were getting themselves into. But in terms of the, external operations, right, you have these lone wolf, attacks that are not sophisticated. It's just a matter of volume. So it's Jade Hussein who, drove the Met and MI5 crazy with all of, these attacks that he was sort of orchestrating that were, very basic. The people are not particularly, they're not sophisticated tactically. They're not particularly strategic. It's more about the volume and distraction for the intelligence and law enforcement agencies. But then you have this other group of external operations, or this other subset of external operations. And those guys are frankly scary. I mean, they are really, that they are sort of hardcore in the sense that they're not going to bother with one person. They're going to do the sophisticated stuff like in Paris or in Brussels, or, trying to bring down a plane with a laptop bomb. That's what these kinds of guys do. So when I started supporting activities going against media and external operations, it was mostly media and external operations of the, kind of like prima donna guys. But what my kind of role a lot of times was one of the things that I really enjoyed doing, at least, was helping mop up their networks. So I was very fortunate in that I was able to do a lot of detection work. And detection is often a challenge at some law enforcement and security services, because you can't stop them all, but before you can stop them, you have to at least see them, right? And a lot of times it's very difficult because you have a lot of people, like you have the Jade Husseins of the world trying to, distract everybody. But you also have a lot of, these sort of goofball guys who, are very serious, but, they're not going to do anything. They're just saying, like they want to be tough guys. They believe that maybe they could, do it. And so they say, blah, blah, blah. Well, okay. Those are the guys that, the FBI can take care of, or, whatever. But a lot of times, it's not quite that easy. And you really have to have a certain vantage point in order to, basically detect a lot of these attacks. And I was fortunate because I was trying to eliminate the external operations people and the media, and it just sort of came naturally to help with these, the sort of the mop up networks before we could get rid of the external operations guys. And I really enjoyed that.
Well, how does that work? I mean, I'm interested in kind of like the nitty gritty of how do you mop up a network? How do you get inside their network from your point of view and what you do?
Oh, well, that's a different question for me to answer.
I'm picturing there's a picture of you wearing the shawl, and you're given the the tuck beer, and I'll be your Habibi forever. Was that how this went down?
Yeah, like on Snapchat?
I have no. You tell me. I don't know.
I mean, no. No, not at all. It really depends on what it is, like what you're tasked with, right? So, like, I had a counterpart who was in the military, she was in the Navy, because I was supporting a task force by that point. So, for the first, I would say maybe 9 months, well, less than that actually. For the first 6 months, I was just doing, I was in the cyber vertical, basically, and so which was overlapped with counterterrorism, but being constrained by the cyber vertical was significantly more challenging than being in counterterrorism. So I just got sort of switched over, and that was really when things started kind of getting fast paced. But in terms of how do you do this sort of thing? I don't know. The people that I worked with were highly skilled and had been doing, a lot of this kind of stuff for a long time. They were in special operations, and because that's who we were supporting. They were in intelligence agencies. They had all this formal training. They'd had experiences doing all sorts of things. I don't know. I just was sort of there. And I'm not saying I'm the least of them in a sense of false modesty. Like I say, I'm pretty good at the things that I do, but I was very much the least of them because they were just extraordinary. I mean, truly extraordinary. But it's a little bit difficult because, we were doing so much work. I mean, really, like, I can speak for myself and say, I was working probably 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, weekends, holidays, you name it, because we just had so much stuff to do. And we were supporting so many different agencies and, security services, intelligence agencies, various law enforcement things, like it was a lot.
I'm just curious, like, how you go about something like this. I was like, for instance, one story I heard was a certain governmental agency of ours that they realized this ISIS cat was on, like, I think it was a Facebook group or something for, like, Ferraris. Like, he was a big fan of, like, a certain type of car. And so they had somebody pretending to be an Arab guy jump into this Facebook group and make source, a human source in real life. Like, let's build some rapport. You're into these cars. I'm into these cars. Let's talk. And got really close to a high-level ISIS guy. And, I believe they eventually wiped him right off the face of the map over in Syria. But I'm just curious if you can lay on us kind of like how that works, or in your experience anyway.
Well, I mean, it really depends on the person. So, I don't know if this is the same person that you're referring to, but there was one, fairly high up Islamic State external operations guy, and he had to get rid of his car, and so he decided to sell his car on the internet, and he sold the car to the wrong person.
So this cat's selling his car on Craigslist, and the next thing you know, CIA's doing a drone strike on him, or F-16s come in.
Well, it was the end of him. I mean, his last thing he ever sold, for sure.
And it was college list.
And I don't know if that's the same person you're referring to. But yeah, no, he definitely got smoked. That's for sure.
Jay, so I'm so curious. Well, first off, my first question is, are you a robot? And the reason I ask that is because I went to DLI and studied Arabic full-time for 15 months and could not have conducted cyber operations. I mean, I could barely get through a third grade primer.
I told her the same story about me. Like, I could say, don't shoot me, and that's about it.
And you just pick it up and are capable of conducting, like, social interactions on social media with it and reading about cybersecurity.
Yeah, but keep in mind, I didn't have to do the speaking portion. So all I had to do was listen and type and read. Mm-hmm. Which, the speaking portion would not have gone over very well.
Oh, well, that's all you had to do.
I don't sound very much like a militant, Islamist. And so that kind of would have really, sort of ended me right in my tracks. But, it's just a matter of, I had studied, quite a few languages beforehand. I really liked learning languages, and Arabic actually was probably the hardest language that I had studied. I mean, I had studied, like I said before, I had studied Mandarin. My mom speaks fluent Mandarin. And so from the time I was about 2, she was speaking to me in Mandarin, which is why I was able to pick up, a little bit of Indonesian, because it's based on the same grammatical structure as ancient Chinese. And so is Vietnamese, although Vietnamese has a whole bunch of tones. They're not similar languages, but they have similar grammatical patterns. And my mind sort of works in terms of, pictures and stuff like that. So it tends to be a little bit easier than languages that are very, very focused on extensive grammar and verb declensions and things like that, like various things changing and whatever, like Arabic or German or Russian, because generally those take a much more mathematical mind that I just don't have. But I really liked Arabic because I really like philosophy, and just Arabic seemed, I don't know. There's something about Arabic that I really liked, and I just sort of stuck with, even when I was just awful about it. When I was really struggling. And then my job, they paid for me to go to Johns Hopkins to study advanced Arabic. So I studied advanced Arabic and, I focused on media and stuff like that. And I did fairly well, although the people in my class were a lot better than me, and they all came from the Department of Defense, or most of them did. They were much higher level Arabic speakers than I was. But I somehow managed to keep up because I was reading and listening, all day long, every day, right? But I was terrible at speaking. But I somehow made it through and got an A in it. So that was pretty neat.
So you, in order to avoid your finance homework, I just have to do this again.
Yeah.
You start reading up on cybersecurity. You're learning Arabic, amongst other things. You get on Twitter. You get interested in this field. You kind of watch what they're doing on Telegram, and they're people who are training them in cybersecurity. And you bring it up to somebody, and then you get a job out of that.
Yeah, basically.
And can you tell us, you got, was it a government job? Was it a civilian contracting job with the government?
No, it was a contracting job.
Okay.
And what I had initially thought that I was, going to be doing was, analyzing the, cyber security stuff kind of in more depth with more, resources and stuff like that. And then like I said, I really like talking to people to learn about things, particularly things that I don't really understand, which was a lot of the technology stuff. So who do you ask? You ask the people who are doing it, right? And so I think people took notice of that, that I would, fairly quickly develop, kind of a rapport, but also that I could learn very quickly. And that while I was talking to them, I started to be able, to kind of identify, okay, well, here's an opportunity later on, something that, we might be able to do. Because I'm not, I'm not very much of a supporter of taking down terrorist propaganda. And I became increasingly against taking down terrorist propaganda. Just because I know how much harm that it does to counterterrorism operations, at least the counterterrorism operations that I've been involved in.
Yeah, Jade, I when I was reporting on ISIS back around this time frame, 2015 or so, I remember being told that JSOC was getting quite frustrated that they had about something like 1,200 or 1,500 targeting packets based off of social media collected information that they were not striking. And now this conversation has me thinking about where those targeting packets came from.
Well, I mean, keep in mind, though, that they're all, all those guys were on the internet, right? It wasn't until, I think, I want to say 2017, that Islamic State started putting out a statement from the, I think it was the delegated committee. And basically what they did for a little while, which was basically don't use social media, don't carry your phones onto the battlegrounds, this is not going that well. And so, but before that, there wasn't really an issue of them, going online and it's in terms of recruitment, it was probably pretty beneficial. Except for the very hardcore external operations guys who are very much sort of in the background. Mm-hmm. In the early times, they don't really have much of a problem, and they sometimes would have their own names on their accounts. At the beginning, on Facebook, and we saw that later on as well, because in terms of East Africa. Which I thought was very interesting because, these people are sort of out there just very much supporting Islamic State on their social media and, connecting with other people and, with their real name. And, it's a bold move.
So when we talk about, when you described your job as being cyber special reconnaissance, it really is using cyberspace, if you will, like in the past, we would send out a special recon team, strategic recon team. There'd be a couple guys in a foxhole with binoculars,
Right.
But this is a modern day form of special reconnaissance that you really are part of that find, fix, finish process, that continuum of targeting to go out, identify where these guys are, locate them. And, obviously you weren't involved in the finish portion of it, but you're trying to lead up to that, I take it.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is that for, a lot of these guys, what you want is them to be, to have their patterns of life, not only fairly known, but it's particularly convenient if you can get them in a specific spot and to stay there for a little while, right? And so, being on their computer is a good time, that could be as any, and so then it's, useful, for the JDAM to come in if they're, just sort of sitting on their computer.
So for the hardcore guys, the sort of the external guys who were disciplined about it, well, a lot of times would they be caught by their surrounding, the people surrounding them that weren't quite so disciplined, and would
No, not really, because those guys, it was more like they needed to have bigger and more impressive displays of, terrorist attacks. And these guys, these guys were really, really creative. A lot of the stuff that they wanted to do. And they were, fairly complex operations. And so I think that at a certain point, at least some of the ones that I'm thinking about, they just got too, they become overwhelming targets in the sense that like so many more resources needed to be devoted to, some of these guys, because it was just absolutely critical that they not get away with some of the stuff that they were planning.
What were they planning? What were, I think there's so many misconceptions about ISIS that we'll have to talk about, but what were some of these external ops that they were planning on trying to pull off that, thankfully were prevented from happening?
Well, I can tell you about different aspects of them. I don't want to get into,
Yeah, you don't need to tell us the chemical composition of the bombs they were trying to make. We don't need to go that far.
Yeah, I mean, well, I can tell you one of the things that I was very worried about, for good reason, was them finding people who were hackers, and who were very sophisticated hackers, to hack into surveillance cameras, and use the surveillance cameras to their advantage when attacking a specific facility. That was one thing that I was very, I'm very glad that did not happen. But one of the reasons that it didn't happen is because they sort of moved on to a much larger target and they were trying to bring down airplanes. But using, the same sort of very technical computer, very technologically centered tactics. And yeah, I mean, these are really smart guys. But like, for example, I knew this guy who was basically in charge of technology for those very hardcore special operations, the external operations guys. And he was very interested in technology, and he was quite, he was very, very smart. But I think that a lot of the things that he was trying to apply weren't really appropriate for the various situations he was trying to apply them to. So he would use, apps or programs for things that he didn't really need to. Or another one would have been much, much better to use. And, he was also in charge of the Islamic, Islamic State guys that he was affiliated with needed laptops And he was in charge of, I don't know, doing something with those laptops, fixing the laptops. I don't know, I'll leave it to your imagination what he was doing. You know, I don't think that I would leave, I mean, aside from the fact that he's ISIS, you know, I don't think I would leave my laptop with this guy with confidence that he'd be able to fix it or do, you know, whatever it is he thinks that he's doing. But it's that kind of thing that, you know, it's those kind of guys that are very important. And those are the kind of guys that I got into, you know, this to do is like I said, I started with the technology guys, you know, because the technology can impact a lot of people when you're trying to give people advice, you know, and if you can give them bad advice, that's even better, because then it, you know, helps the people at NSA or FBI or wherever, because they're able to exploit them easier because they're not actually taking the precautions that they think that they're taking. So when people talk about, like, for example, you know, anti-Islamic State propaganda, and, you know, psychological operations, and they say, oh, you know, this is terrible. You know, counter messaging is by the State Department is not going that well, which I would agree with. You know, I agree that kind of like counter messaging stuff did not succeed. I don't know really what the goal was. I mean, is the goal you just get people not to join ISIS, or they're going to defect from ISIS, or what are they doing? I don't know. But a lot of it is, you know, because who cares what the State Department has to say? And you know, even, you know, Muslim leaders to a certain extent, you know, very helpful, you know, when talking to, you know, like normal people to dissuade them from, you know, doing things that they're going to regret later. But guys who believe in, you know, this stuff, that's never going to happen. Right. And the best way to counter, I guess, their propaganda is to get rid of the propagandists. You know, and one of the ways to get rid of the propagandists, you know, is by spreading, you know, this kind of like, you know, bad advice, or by, you know, conjuring up problems, or better yet, using these guys who have a lot of authority within the Islamic State by virtue of their position to kind of unwittingly spread the propaganda that you want them to spread. I mean, they're not gonna, you know, they're not gonna be making statements to Voice of America or something. Right. But it is to the U.S., you know, to U.S. interests to say, because so. One thing that I've spoken to Jack about, that I think, again, is not very widely acknowledged, because a lot of the criticisms, you know, that these social media companies aren't, you know, taking down such and such propaganda, they're not deleting this person's account, they're not doing this, they're not doing that. It's not so much about the propaganda, at least when it came to the Islamic State, because they were running an entire, basically, like, administrative mechanism through social media. So, you know, because keep in mind, they're running in, you know, the international thing here, right? So, you know, like, for example, the media guys. Sorry about the howling. I own a wolf. So, you know, these guys who, well, I'll use Rumia for an example. So Rumia was one of their magazines intended for international audiences. So it didn't come in Arabic, although a lot of that was basically just lifted from one of their other Arabic publications. But Rumia came in, I think, 8 languages. And, you know, the people in Afghanistan were doing the Urdu. Obviously, you know, they had Indonesian, they had Spanish, I think they had French, they had Uyghur, they had Russian. Okay, but because they're different media.
This is the beauty of live streaming right here. You get it all.
Yeah. Well, that is my fire station, actually. So, yeah, so, you know, they're not just dealing with, you know, the little arts and crafts projects all like in one room, all, you know, hunker down in Raqqa or Mayadid or wherever. Some of these guys are in Afghanistan. Some of these guys are in Southeast Asia. Some of these guys are, wherever. And they've kind of got us, herd cats. It's like herding cats, trying to get some of these projects, that they had to get off the ground. Because, terrorist organizations are also just organizations, and they have the same kind of organizational management issues as any other organization. You have people who are lazy. You have people who are just sort of, not doing what they're supposed to be doing, or they're causing drama, or, this, that, the next thing. And particularly, they run into, different problems like, attrition. Like there was one guy that I knew, he started fighting in Afghanistan, and kind of like on the, as like a, boot kind of guy. And then he decided he didn't want to do that, or he got injured or something, and he was bored. And then he got drawn into the media department. And he got in the media department because he had various languages and stuff. And then fairly quickly, within a few years, he became very, very influential in the in the media, like for Afghanistan. It's leadership through attrition, basically. There's a lot of really great job opportunities in these terrorist groups, but the retirement package is awful.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. Sorry, what was the question?
So, it's pretty great, though. Once you get things up and running, I imagine, because unlike some of these terrorist organizations we dealt with in the past, they were trying to create a state with all of the bureaucracies and the appendages of the state, which, the American military, and I imagine the intelligence community as well, we're very familiar with how to target a state. We understand how to do that, and we're pretty good at it. Whereas
we also understand paperwork.
Right.
Yeah. No, that was really interesting when I sort of realized that, that not only because, usually, like, for example, like the FBI I keep referring to the FBI, or the terrorism analysts, it's very much like on the surface. So it's who is, in these groups, what are they sort of distributing, whatever. But that's very surface level, and it's very sort of understates what exactly these people were using the internet for. Mm-hmm. Because it wasn't just recruitment. It was very much, there were entire, very, very consequential, communications networks. Mm-hmm. There were very consequential, logistics networks. And, you had the people who were doing recruitment, on the ground, like the kind of like bureaucrats. You had various bureaucrats all over the place.
Jade, can I ask you, I want to take 2 seconds to give a word to our sponsors here, but I want to ask you, as building off of this topic a little bit, what some of the misconceptions are about ISIS and what it was that they were actually trying to do, what that kind of bureaucracy looked like, because I feel like what we got in the media, so to speak, was not an adequate explanation of what the hell was going on in Iraq and Syria at the time. But that'll be my next one for you. But first, I just real quick want to give a shout out first to Lucy Nicotine. They're a company founded by Caltech scientists and former smokers looking for a better and cleaner nicotine alternative. They researched and developed it for 3 years. It's a nicotine gum with 4 milligrams of nicotine, comes in 3 flavors, wintergreen, cinnamon, and pomegranate. They also have a lozenge with 4 milligrams of nicotine in it, comes in 3 flavors, cherry ice, citrus, and mint. So it's out now. You can get it. For TEAMHOUSE listeners, go to lucy.co, use the promo code TEAMHOUSE, and get 20% off of all your products on your first order, including gum and lozenges. That's lucy.co, use promo code TEAMHOUSE. Also, I got to give this disclaimer here. This product contains nicotine derived from tobacco, and nicotine is an addictive chemical.
You're on a lot of, you probably rubbed shoulders with some of the some of those guys who always had a dip in.
Maybe not. She was working with smart kids. I don't think there was like rangers.
No, I was like the nerdiest person that I was working with, to be perfectly honest with you. Like the task force that I was working with were very hardcore people, people who were not just staying at their computers.
That's the way it should be, really. That it's all blended together, right?
Yeah, basically. Because you have the stuff we were doing, and then we were kind of, hand in glove with the people on the ground. Yeah. Supporting, various special forces, special operations, and our allies.
Well, there's a litmus test for this. Was there anyone in the office who had a spitter and they were spitting Coke juice into like an empty Coke bottle?
Well, I wasn't in the office where most of the people that I worked with were. So
this is bullshit.
Maybe I kind of know it.
All right, second word from our sponsor here, Bluebird Botanicals, one of the oldest CBD companies in the industry, founded in 2012. They where are they here? They make a cooling pain relief cream. It's a cream formulated to provide relief from minor aches and pains in muscles and joints. Perfect for temporary treatment of post-exercise inflammation, backaches, arthritis, sprains, strains, and bruises. They make United We Chill broad spectrum CBD. It's Bluebird's broad spectrum CBD line. Includes which the line includes cannabinoids from hemp, but less than 0.01% THC. Broad spectrum extracts and CBD isolates are best for those looking to avoid THC completely. Comes in 3 different flavors: strawberry, margarita, lemon drop, and watermelon. I guess that would be 4 different flavors. Made with sugar-free sweeteners and natural flavors. Delicious enough to be taken on its own or add to your favorite beverage of choice. D, do we have a promo code? Team 50.
Oh, this weekend, Team 50, you get 50% off your orders. I use that cream. It's like menthol and the CBD. And it's great for, it's been great for my joints.
What's the website? Is it just Bluebird Botanicals? BluebirdBotanicals.com.
Yeah.
Oh, and D probably has it up on screen. He's one step ahead of me.
And have you been, those droppers,
I use it. It helps me sleep a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Have you ever tried any CBD oil, Jane?
No, isn't that the stuff that comes from marijuana?
It is, but it's without the THC. It's the CBD. I don't know what cannabis or whatever it is. But they do a broad spectrum, which is apparently what you need because like they work together, the different aspects of the CBD.
So
anyway,
let's get to the question about ISIS. What do you think, as far as the public discourse, the media portrayal of ISIS? I would like to hear your you are kind of like the source in a lot of ways because you were directly interfacing with these morons over there in real time and learning about their organization and structure. So I'm really interested to hear your perspective on what ISIS was and is, as what the rest of us heard about in the press.
Well, one of the things that I would say was probably the most important thing that we were doing, aside from, obviously targeting and doing, detection of, external operations overseas, was dismantling a lot of their, these administrative, kind of the administrative side of things in cyberspace, right? Because it's one thing if you are going to kill, somebody, and then somebody else is going to take their job, and then, the administrative stuff just, continues, right? Mm-hmm. But what you really have to do is try to, add, in conjunction with, getting rid of these people, also doing things to bring down what they've created, which was a fairly capable, fairly robust international, administrative sort of and logistical, capacity. And so minimizing, or significantly reducing that was extraordinarily important, and that was something that we all believed that was extremely important. So, aside from just, getting rid of people and saving lives, which are obviously, the paramount considerations, in order to kind of remain effective, you basically have to, dismantle things, and the higher you can dismantle things, the better off you're basically going to be, right?
How important do you think a personality like Baghdadi really was to that organizational structure?
Well, I think that he was critical. Was he critical to the internet? No. There's a lot of people who were very important, like Ben Ali, he's like a scholar. There are a lot of people who were very, very important who had absolutely nothing to do with the internet, and I had nothing to do with them. So that's why I don't really talk about them. But there were a lot of people that you wouldn't necessarily think would be using, social media. Not social media, but communications that are not public. But aren't quite as secure as you would think, or were involved in various ways. I don't know.
Yeah, so like Baghdadi's on MySpace talking to his boys.
And I guess Tom, probably. Tom was probably his first friend on MySpace.
Jade, were you surprised, because it's surprising to me, were you surprised when you first started getting into this how savvy and widespread ISIS was when it came to the technological side? Because the news, the images, I'm not saying this is how the media portrayed them. It's just that the images that we saw were them rolling through the desert on Hiluxes and whatnot, out in the middle of nowhere. And then it's surprising to hear that they had sort of such a robust technological sort of stance too, or capability.
Well, for example, they had a drone program, right? I think you probably heard about the drone program, and they would have these leaders for the drone program. They had instructors to teach their guys, how to fly the drones and, attach various things to the drones and, try not to lose the drones, don't break the drones, things like that. I think they had a lot of sophisticated things on the ground as well that had not, that were, very technologically advanced, that had nothing to do with, with us necessarily. But like I said, I started off with some of the tech guys. So initially that was just sort of like they're hackers. And sort of, dealing with them in one way or another. And their skills were not particularly impressive. But they achieved what they wanted to achieve, which was scare everyone, right? So one of the things that really, really bothered me was that they would put out these kill lists.
Right, I remember that.
Yeah, it was literally just people's names they had found, kind of just like on the internet, in certain cases, they were a little more serious than that. But for some of these things, for a period of time, they would just sort of create these lists, and then publish them. And these very, self-serving consultancy firms and research firms, would write these very hyperbolic articles, about the significant threat of Islamic State and of the hackers and the kill lists, and it's only a matter of time until they take down the grid or whatever. That was sort of, I never understood that part where they're
it's like they're doing the work for ISIS by hyping this up.
Yeah, well, and also they're going to hire people to hack into the grid. like I don't know. I mean, but people were very scared of that, even though there was really no indication that they particularly wanted to do that. And I mean, sometimes, these firms and these publications, they would say something, and Islamic State had absolutely no intention of doing that. And then, but one of their, supporters was like, "Hey, that's a pretty good idea.
Mm-hmm.
I'll hack the grid." Like, okay, well, first of all, you're not going to be able to do that with the platform that you're using right now, and you're not, I mean, but it's a vicious cycle, right? Because someone then, let's say, gets arrested later on, for trying to hack the grid. What they don't say is that he can't, even escape, Vim or
right.
any of his other, things. He doesn't know what he's doing. But all of a sudden, he is hacking the grid, and everyone is confirming, their belief that, Islamic State wants to hack the grid. And it doesn't work for them. But in particular, with the kill list, it bothered me because they would create these kill lists, and then they would, these firms would very quickly, put out these very hyperbolic things, to scare people, and people, I can understand why they would be scared, because these are experts, and they're using expert credibility, to say something that there was no evidence that people were going to go, after them or whatever, because there were literally thousands of names, but I read that these articles, later written by people who were on those lists, and it really, really scared them. And I felt awful. But the terrorists would be looking on, social media, and they would be looking for their own publicity, right? So that they could tell what was effective,
right,
and what was less effective. What would scare people, what was not going to scare people, what could grab people's attention, so that these firms, could kind of,
promote their message.
It's almost like everyone benefits in some odd way.
Jade, out of curiosity, like we're used to, say, China, Russia, Iran, having, very competent hackers. Are you saying that for the Islamic State, that they were basically like script kidding, people working with like Kali, but not really understanding hacking per se, and they'd have to bring in outsiders if they wanted to do elaborate jobs?
No, some of them were very, some of them did have skills, because some of them, and a lot of those people, which again is sort of how I got into the, which is why, how I went from sort of like this kind of like junior level role, to a much different team that I had started with. I sort of kept progressing, but because the external operations had a lot of guys who had very strong computer science backgrounds.
Okay.
And part of the Islamic State, some of these hackers that were affiliated with the Islamic State had had close ties to Alfar Khan, who had been the head of Islamic State media until he was also smoked.
Retired, yeah.
Yeah, he was forcibly retired. He was forced out. So, it was all very connected, like external operations, the, technology and hacking, and media. And to a certain extent, I also didn't quite understand why it needed to be, let's kill the Islamic State online with, 1,000 mosquito bites. Okay, but, is it worse to have, like 1,000 little, mosquito bites, or is it better to just sort of, I don't know, like, sort of pierce the center of their heart, which is sort of what we were doing, right? because
by
we're trying to dismantle everything that they've built, not just, from the guys in, Iraq and Syria, but also, with Afghanistan, and in the Southeast Asia, various parts of Sub-Saharan Africa.
Jade, I'd like to ask you a little bit briefly, what was the motivation between the external operations? Was that primarily to try to drive recruitment or to prove their legitimacy? Because it seems like they were still very much in the process of consolidating their so-called Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. What was the point of them doing this sort of expeditionary terrorism in the United States and the UK and France and so on?
I mean, there are a lot of different benefits, for them to do, to conduct, these terrorist attacks. One of the things that I thought was actually really interesting, about the security of Muslims, that in order to expand, let me see if I can remember this quite right, that in order to have an Islamic State, you have to prove that you can protect the Muslims who live in it. And so this was also part of that. I mean, obviously, we know from, Zarqawi, he would conduct these attacks in order to undermine, people's faith in the security services. It just kind of, what they were doing and kind of for recruitment. But it also has this sort of theological sense to it. I mean, I'm sure that I would be better able to articulate, more about that if it was not, quite so late. But no, I mean, it was interesting. I don't know. I mean, you also get groups who are not involved in external operations, but who are also just trying to get the attention of the Islamic State. So, right. For example, there were these guys in an African country who had made their little video and who had tried to send it to the committee, the leadership committee in the Islamic State, which has these really, the most authoritative guys in the Islamic State, to kind of review their video and whatever. So they were very upset, though, because they didn't hear back. And they'd been waiting and waiting and waiting, and their guys were getting sort of antsy. But they didn't hear back. And I mean, keep in mind, this was also at a time when the Islamic State guys, especially those guys, were on the run, or were, trying to hide out somewhere. And pretty much, everyone was on the run, and they're wondering, have they seen our video? No, probably not. And so after about a month, they got tired of waiting. And so then they attacked a whole bunch of peacekeepers, UN peacekeepers. And then they sort of continued attacking various things that, that they knew would get the attention of the Islamic State. And not just, oh, here, we're here. Kind of, and they're just going to sort of sit around and do nothing. Right. Like nobody wants, a lame province in the middle of the jungle. At least do something if you're going to do something. Right. And so that's what they did. And then they had people from like Kenya, because these guys were in a country that didn't have very good internet connection, particularly. I guess Wi-Fi is kind of hard in the area where they were. So they had people in other African countries that were sort of like helping them out in terms of communications and logistics and whatever. And it did catch, and financing, obviously. And it worked, right? And they did become an official province.
So their initial video is sort of like an audition, like a real world, like the real world audition. Yeah. To get,
like the bigger the war crime you can commit.
Yeah. To get funding, to get recognition and things like that. Is that sort of?
No, they're basically pledging their allegiance to Baghdadi. And they're saying like this, we're here. This is the Islamic State, and we are, loyal to Baghdadi. They're not particularly interesting videos. There's no music. There's no, yeah, I mean, it's basically just like some guys in a room, and the thing is this is for every province. So every province in Iraq, every province in Syria, every province in different parts of the world. So every province, they send in a little video, and it's just a bunch of really like sweaty guys saying, let's do this. And so they were very excited about it, and these guys, and it was just sort of a bummer to have to like wait around, and they decided they didn't want to do that anymore.
When you say every province, so is it like a franchise? I mean, and I don't mean to make light of it, but if there are two competing groups in the same province that both want recognition as sort of the ISIS representative.
No, they're not. There's no competitors in each one of the provinces.
Okay.
So, like there's several provinces in Iraq, there's several provinces in Syria, and those are all, they have their little, each one has like their little governor, and they have various levels of, bureaucracy. And in some of these areas, you have your head guy, and then you have, his sort of lieutenants who are in charge of various things, and then they're emirs, and then they've got sort of sub emirs, and it's like a bureaucracy. And there was a debate really that people had that I thought was really interesting. And it was, what makes somebody a member of the Islamic State? Because you have these guys who are on the internet, who are in the middle of, Idaho or wherever, and they're saying, I'm the Islamic State. Well, at what point do you become the Islamic State, and what point are you just sort of a fanboy?
Right.
And is it a matter of going to Iraq and Syria? Well, probably not, because you can go to, that African country, or you can go to Southeast Asia, or you can go to, a lot of different places, right? So what exactly is it that makes you, a member of the Islamic State? And my answer was always, you are a member of the Islamic State when you have to follow the commands of your emir. So if you don't have an emir, then you're kind of uninvolved. I mean, you may think you're very involved, but you're certainly not a member of the Islamic State.
Jade,
yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Please finish.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to ask you if you could tell the story about the dude that the SAS picked up that tried to drop dime on you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So there was this guy who was very... the guy that I mentioned earlier, the one who sort of started as a boot and then kind of became a bureaucrat, and then, sort of leadership to a tripping guy. So he got to the position that he got to later on because the leader that they had, who was in charge of a lot of stuff in Afghanistan, was indefinitely unavailable for a while. Indefinitely. Because so this guy was very important. And, obviously, like I said before, we were, working hand in glove with the guys on the ground. And so, they picked up this guy and they went to go, interrogate him. And while he's being interrogated by SAS, he says, you don't really want me. You want actually someone else. And it turned out to be me. He's like, oh, this, I'm nothing. This is really, the person that you want. And it's like, well, God, just a couple days ago, we were brothers, and now, you're giving me up.
Right.
I mean, you can't trust anybody. But it was, I don't know, it was a really interesting experience. Particularly since this very important person thought, that, I don't know, somehow the SAS was going to leave him alone. I don't know. I mean, he's gone. I assume he was just thrown a hole somewhere in Afghanistan.
So was there a moment in time where like the SAS was like running up the flagpole, like, holy shit, we got to get Jade Parker, get her right now, give us a grid?
No, I mean, I worked a lot with the Brits.
So they knew pretty quickly.
No, it was pretty much just funny. I mean, these guys didn't know who I was.
But they knew you were working for the home team.
Oh yeah. I mean, I worked quite a lot, on British security. So, yeah, they were not particularly worried.
So the SWAT team was not blowing down your door that night?
No, everybody thought it was really funny.
So, how familiar were you with ISIS before you got on Twitter, before you started that whole journey?
I mean, I was familiar with them in the sense that I, would read articles and stuff. I lived in Jordan and I worked in Jordan for a while, doing, some stuff. I was also there while when they closed the border with Syria.
Uh-huh.
And not long after they had the pilot who, the Islamic State killed. And they had, the big sort of, not protests, but, I don't know, public kind of like demonstrations, in mourning for him.
So going from sort of being a casual observer, like a lot of people, right? Or reading the articles and seeing the news clips, and then getting more in depth, what were some of the more surprising, shocking, interesting things that you learned as you got deeper into it?
That's a very good question. Well, I think that what I learned was not so much, or the thing I found, I guess, most shocking, I don't know, which I think is probably the same thing that comes to everyone who's working on, counterterrorism and intelligence operations, is that there's just so much that you don't really, there's a lot that's just really goofy, what these people do. Like for a while they were trying to raise money by selling furniture. It just
college list again.
And it's a lot of stuff that people don't see, and it's something that I've talked to Jack about how there are intelligence professionals and special operations guys who should know better about these conspiracy theories. But they know they've sort of seen the wizard behind the curtain, and that they know that not everything is exactly how it seems. And it's also a point of frustration that I have with a lot of terrorism research, because it's a lot, and it's a very big vulnerability, because once the terrorists know that not only that they can manipulate you in terms of getting you to amplify the terror, but also they can get you to undermine human credibility by egregiously misrepresenting what is actually happening, behind the curtain. But it was and I think that it's probably a common experience that people doing these kinds of operations do, not just in cyberspace, but the fact that the reality can be so much different, than, for example, what people who are just sort of monitoring things on the surface, or just sitting on Telegram, monitoring propaganda, or stuff like that. That there's just this entire different world that people wouldn't even be thinking about, and some of it is very funny, because they're people, right? And people are people, and people, some of them are pains in the butt, and some of them are, some of them got their own agenda, and some of them, whatever, and personalities clash, and things happen. But I don't know, a lot of our solutions, it seems, are based on a lot of information that is just very shallow, right? And I know that that's done on purpose. Obviously, they can't know what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
but it makes for like really poor, recommendations, because so you have the policy on one side, who is getting the research and stuff that's informed by this very sort of shallow interpretation, that because they're not seeing all this other stuff that's going on, that's not just stuff we're doing, or one of our allies is doing, or one of our partners is doing. It's what they're doing, that's more important,
right,
than these things that they're looking at. And we tailor our our policies, particularly when it comes to social media, on these very superficial aspects of terrorist arts and crafts.
right.
Like, okay, well, we don't we don't like the arts and crafts, and so we're going to get rid of them. And do you want to save the people, or do you want to get rid of
The bad
this
guys.
stuff?
Yeah.
Because most extremists do not become terrorists, right? The overwhelming majority of extremists never become terrorists. And this conflation of extremists and terrorists, the terrorists are the guys who get off their butts and actually start, doing stuff. Extremists are just, they believe in things, and, they're there and maybe they're running their mouth, but they're not going to commit acts of terrorism. And so when you're shutting these things down, yes, maybe you are limiting the exposure to people. And yes, fewer people will become extremists. But when you're talking specifically about violence, and you're talking about terrorism as opposed to extremism, because taking all the content off, of course, it's not, it's good for countering, extremism, but it's awful for countering terrorism.
Right.
Because, you are disrupting a lot of things that to benefit no one.
Is there an... Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, when we talked earlier, I mentioned to Jade that there was a point where a lot of human trafficking domestically was run off of a back page.
Right.
And DOJ moved in and shut down, if not that website, the portion, the adult section of it, to crack down on human trafficking. So ostensibly, it's a great thing. But a police officer who counters human trafficking was telling me the problem is this is what law enforcement monitors, so we know who to go after.
Right.
If you shut it all down, human trafficking isn't going away. You just drive it into the dark web or encrypted channels, and it becomes a big question of how does law enforcement now get back up to speed and start tracking all this stuff.
Find them.
Right.
Is there also is there a counter argument? I'm just asking. Is there a counter argument that more extremism gives a wider audience for that feeder and leads to more terrorism?
Yeah, that is the argument.
Okay. Do you feel is it as though it's a valid argument, or do you feel that the terrorists are going to be terrorists regardless? That the numbers of terrorists that evolve out of the extremism is like minuscule. Or not?
The thing is that shutting down terrorist propaganda is not limiting. I mean, it's limiting the exposure.
Uh-huh.
But the people who are interested in terrorist propaganda are going to pretty much find terrorist propaganda.
Right.
And it's not like you are, addressing these people's, the reason these people get into it. You're not, you're just literally just shutting things down. Well, and then they pop up back again anyway. And I'm not saying that that's not useful for some things. It was just very, very detrimental to us.
Right.
And the thing is that there was a lot of very intense debate within the United States, intelligence community, and too. A while back, I had a conversation with someone who's a principal of an intelligence agency, and he was saying that in my entire career, I've never seen any kind of debate quite as fierce as the one between over terrorist propaganda.
Interesting.
Because you have the people who a lot of times people mistake shutting these down for aggressive counterterrorism things,
right.
Where and so they say, okay, no, we gotta shut the things down to do something.
Right.
And this is us being, very tough on terrorism. And it's like, okay, but you're making it extraordinarily difficult to the people who are like really making an impact and real, it got very, very difficult.
Right.
Yeah.
Jade, I want to throw a couple viewer questions at you real quick. And if anyone has questions for Jade, hit us up. Voltage Blue asks, was this something you scrubbed for manually, or did you later evolve into using web scrapers and other cyber forensic tools for your collections?
I'm not going to get into what tools that I used because I was using government tools. I mean, when I was supporting the task force, you mean?
What about before that? What about when you said like you downloaded all the stuff about cyber security? You were just kind of doing it on your own.
Yeah, I was procrastinating.
Yeah, right. So like what were there specific tools, like open source tools that you were using back then that
like scrapers? Not really. I mean, because I would say not really. I mean, at the time there weren't as many channels, like for example on Telegram, because every time people would start shutting them down, they then had to create 10 more as with a whole bunch of backups and everything, right? And so very quickly the number of like Telegram channels, for example, just like exploded when Telegram started sort of taking them down. But at the time there was not very many things, and so all I had to do was sort of scroll up, and just sort of download things. But I mean, later on, obviously, I mean, when I stopped supporting military activities, and I left because our team basically just everybody went on to do different stuff. My counterpart went to Syria. Other people were promoted within their own agencies, or they were reassigned to different things. I left. I got a job as the director of a global analysis at a tech firm called Babel Street, and they do. It's a software platform that's for intelligence and defense communities, and that's a lot more sophisticated than like the stuff that I was doing. Mm-hmm. But the reason that those platforms are useful is because when you shut the propaganda one thing down, these people are going to get the message out somehow. Right. Like they've got things to say, and you taking down that little thing is not a sustainable solution. And so things like Babel Street, yes, you need very sophisticated. You're using very sophisticated monitoring tools, but this did not require that at that time, because that was fairly early. Right. I mean, not super early, but it was.
Ian asks, how can someone stateside work on their own and infiltrate these groups? Can you contact the FBI and let them know you're on the good side?
I don't know. I mean, I think you'd have to ask somebody who work. I mean, I assume you could contact the FBI. I don't know. That was not like I've said, that was not my job. That was not what I was doing. I had no interest whatsoever in getting finding someone and then convincing them to carry out a terrorist attack, which I'm not saying isn't valuable work. I'm not saying that they don't have of course it's valuable. Some of the guys really do want to attack, but that was not my job. But I'm sure you could probably contact the FBI, although I wouldn't recommend using your name, calling into some podcast saying you want to work for the FBI. But know, whatever. Like, no, I'm sure they could use you. I mean, if you're passionate about it, you know, that's what government agencies look for.
I think that something like that runs the risk. The same like people who try to infiltrate like the whole child predator networks is that there's that time between you infiltrating and you not having an actual like excuse for why you're in that
it's right? Like when our guys get out of the military and start doing like freelance work over in South America or wherever. It's like, you're not operating under federal authorities here, buddy. You know, you're not, if you do that on your own, you're not badged. You're not operating under the authorities of a law enforcement officer. So you may very well be breaking all kinds of laws.
Yeah. But not only that, like you might be mistaken for an actual collaborator or predator or terrorist or whatever else before you ever have a chance to explain yourself.
D has a question. D, is this you? Is it different, D? All right. D says, hi, Jade. In terms of scrubbing social media of extremist terrorist content drying up leads, wouldn't January 6th be a counterpoint to the unchecked amplification that led to violent escalation?
Well, I think there's a lot of different things to unpack in that. A counterpoint to it, to the amplification. I'm not sure that that's why they, attacked. But I don't think that this is probably the best venue to go into all those different issues. I don't know.
Isaac says, I read your article, so I have a weird question. Is it possible for far-right extremists like QAnon's militia? I don't know that QAnon has a militia, by the way, but to finish asking the question, and others like it, could they evolve into the 7th Cavalry from HBO's Watchmen? I haven't watched the show, so I'm not sure what he means there.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't watched the show either. But like in terms of what like the accelerationists started infiltrating QAnon way back. I started picking up on their infiltration when I was at Battle Street, and I was, leading our team of analysts, and I was monitoring the midterm elections, and basically undo, kind of these, influence operations against, our midterm elections, and I was hired by Battle. So the guy who had the similar position to what I had come from the open source DNI CIA open source center, and he was very much a quantitative guy. And my supervisor was also very quantitative. She'd come from also CIA and running the cyber center at CIA, or not running the cyber center, but helping to create the cyber center at CIA. And so I came into this position, not so much from a quantitative perspective or an engineering perspective, but from someone who, kind of what I was saying before, was very cognizant of the human factors that aren't necessarily reflected in the data on the surface, and that was what I really liked about influence operations, because it's not just, aside from my long, kind of interest in propaganda and persuasion and mass psychology, that you very much can tell the difference between people using tradecraft that you're familiar with, as opposed to just sort of, kind of dorks on the internet, right? And so we were looking at, I had detected quite a bit of amplification from nation state amplification of a lot of these threats of violence. And I also noticed that people were in there provoking people to commit acts of violence. But the way that they were doing it, it was very clear that some of them had, at least a couple of them, not all of them, were familiar with certain tradecraft. And I know that because I am also familiar with the same tradecraft. And so that is really what drew me into the accelerationists and saying, okay, this is a problem, because first of all, you have the nation state who is amplifying violent content, and then you have, and I thought actually that the intelligence, people with intelligence and military, these people informed about tradecraft were of the same nation state, were involved in, I assumed it was that government doing various operations that were, working together. And that wasn't quite the case. But those people were infiltrating QAnon. And some of them were just regular, white supremacists. Some of them were just, regular people who wanted to cause the downfall of Western civilization. Which is one thing, and it's bad. No doubt about it, those people are dangerous, particularly what they were doing, and they were very much under the radar. But it's also considerably more dangerous when people have the skills, to cause a lot more harm and to be a lot more effective. So, it was some of the same guys who would later, join like the Base, which was a white supremacist group. And that was, started by an American who had worked at the Pentagon, targeting terrorists. And then at some point he moved to St. Petersburg and was started, was...
What a coincidence.
What?
What a coincidence.
Yeah, what a coincidence. But, there are a couple of things about him that to me don't really add up, because here's this guy who has, he did everything wrong. Like, I'm very good at giving people terrible, security advice. Like, trust me, but this guy really went above and beyond giving his, the base members who were supposed to be, very scary terrorists, neo-Nazi accelerationists, pretty much doing everything that anyone with any kind of, intelligence or military experience would absolutely tell people not to do, like being very public about, their little, kind of like band camp get-togethers, and getting everyone together in one spot and doing, just doing stuff that doesn't make any sense.
But doesn't this go back to like, don't bullshit a bullshitter? Like, this is what you used to do to the Islamic State. You see him doing it.
Yeah.
Doesn't it seem like an effort to flush people out?
Yeah. Exactly. But what a lot of academics or journalists or whoever, what they see is, oh my gosh, like there's, these people are very scary, and that guy is a ringleader of this thing and whatever. And I mean, one of the reasons, so for example, when I started, picking up on the state-backed actors, the amplification of violence and all this stuff, I went to, the intelligence community, specific people. I went to people that I know, and I arranged to, give sort of a presentation about it. And at that time, everyone basically thought I was a conspiracy theorist for some reason. Yes, what I was talking about was a conspiracy, but every intelligence operation is a conspiracy. I think it's not a very fine line, but it's a distinction that is often, kind of overlooked. Like, going back to the, intelligence and military operations, people getting into conspiracies, because that, people are like, well, maybe something is happening, or
right.
And when you open that door, you can walk a little too far out the door.
Well, like someone like General Mike Flynn, who very much operated in that world and started seeing conspiracies all over the place. But,
right.
I mean, Jade, I remember I came upon this topic as accelerationism started to come into the public sphere, and I think I read your article about it, and I remember this was like a year and a half, 2 years ago. I remember having a phone conversation with you about this, and it honestly scared the shit out of me what you told me, that
like, I worked for, as I've said, I have been in a lot of, experiences that would probably scare a lot of people. Being like very nervous about, oh, this person's going to attack this person's going to attack that, and whatever. And that never really, I have never been more terrified when I figured out a lot of stuff that these guys were doing, and no one believed me. And no one cared. And people thought that I had gone off the deep end. Because, at the time, everyone was all about the lone wolf white supremacist.
Mm-hmm.
Lone wolf white supremacist this, everybody's a white supremacist, this, that, the next thing. And as everyone was gradually kind of proven wrong about various things, then the definition of far right very much expanded beyond what it had been before, which is fascism and militias, right? Because the purpose of counterterrorism and, domestic terrorism, efforts is the preservation of the stability of the United States and people who want to overthrow the government, right? And so we now have a lot of extremists who don't want to overthrow the government, but they are, considered extreme. And now, it's just ever expanding. But at the time, I was saying, no, these aren't just white supremacists. No, these people have infiltrated these, a lot of different kinds of groups and ideologies and of interests, including QAnon, but not just QAnon, and certainly white supremacist groups, but not just white supremacist groups. It was also Moors, and it was also black supremacists, and it was also, Maoists, and it's, all these different kinds of, very, very diverse groups that they had infiltrated.
But to what end? I mean, what is their goal? That they're clearly not moored by some sort of ideology in the way that we commonly think about it. They're going into these groups that have a predilection towards violence per se, trying to spin them up. But I mean, what for?
Well, so back to Zarqawi, right, and late '90s Al Qaeda leadership, who believed that, well, and also in the management of savagery, later on, that said, okay, you get one group to attack the other group, right, and that's what Zarqawi did, right? He would attack. He had the two neighbors, the Shia and the Sunni, and then he made the Shia believe that it was the Sunni that had attacked something, and so then it would create these cascades of violence against each other, right? And you get drawn into this cycle of this
civil war,
and that's what they were doing to the United States in terms of the Democrats and the Republicans, right? So accelerationism is not speed, right? So anyone who's taken physics knows that velocity and acceleration are two different, things, right? So while acceleration does contribute to the speed, there are different tactics involved in, what they're trying to do specifically, right? So they're trying to accelerate things, but they're doing that, in terms of, manipulation of perceptions. And they know that the divisiveness between Democrats and Republicans can, very much harness this same kind of energy that, when you have, Shia attacking, Sunni, and Sunni attacking Shia, and, this, it just sort of gets worse, right? Like there's no real way to, de-escalate, especially if you don't know what's happening. And it was something that I realized that they were doing. and I would tell people, and they said, no, that's not at all what is happening. Because the thing is that if you choose targets, that, or you choose attackers that fit some stereotype, or that you use an implement. Yeah, well, the attacker uses an implement that is politically controversial. These are different ways, that you can help, basically manipulate public perception. That's not just terror, but it's terror in a specific way that is going to provoke one of, the partisan sides, and it's going to, ricochet throughout those, quite separate media ecosystems, right? I think that, we can, maybe not everyone agrees with this, but, the liberal media, in terms of partisan political, it's very separate from, the conservative partisan media. Very different narratives. A lot of, they're not talking to each other, they're talking to, their viewers and stuff, and right. People get these very different narratives going, and those shape their beliefs and their perspectives about the world. And if you can get, one group to believe, something, and they can, just viciously attack the other side, even verbally or or physically or whatever, that fuels the divisions.
Right. If they can point to facts also, like if the liberals can point to January 6th as, these people are off the chain, and the conservatives can point to, the riots in Portland and the White House, right. All that stuff, then they can say these people are off the chain. And it's
right. and look at both of those incidents, okay? Because you have the Black Lives Matters protests. I think, obviously the one in Minneapolis, but I think elsewhere they also documented. There were accelerationists that were, identified at those protests who were trying to rile everybody up, at the Black Lives Matter.
Oh, you're talking about when the white people show up in balaclavas with hammers and start just smashing windows and stuff.
Oh no, some of those people are just anarchists. That's the thing, is that you have people who are actually extremists and who are ideologues. Accelerations are not really those people. So they can turn into them, but the people that I'm more concerned about are not extremist ideologues. It's people who want to get other people to commit acts of violence. Because I'm interested in terrorism, not so much changing people's political opinions, even if they're bad opinions.
It's interesting how you explain that, because I think it really clarifies something that, like, a lot of times I think people, and I have in the past, thought of accelerationists as people who wanted to see the fall of the government quickly, like accelerate the fall because it's going to happen. But you mean more like an accelerant, like an explosive or a munition, the catalyst to make something explode.
Well, accelerationism has a lot of different kind of meanings in different communities. So I don't want to imply that all accelerationists are militants, because for a long time they were mostly members of sort of these subcultures that had like an accelerationism bent to them. So they believed that because of capitalism and technology would cause the fall of modernity, right, of Western civilization eventually. All right. And any acts that they took to facilitate that were relatively minor. Okay. So I'm not talking, and a lot of times it was just kind of people into philosophy and people, into being edgy on the internet. And those people are not terrorists and they're not extremists. And I want to make that very clear, that the people that I'm talking about are very much terrorists. And they want the destruction of Western civilization, and they want to bring down the United States first. But they know that they don't have enough people to do that in any kind of way. And they know that all these, kind of these groups also don't have the manpower to do it. You know what I mean? That's why they have to get so many people kind of spinning all the tops in the same direction. That's why they have to infiltrate these groups, not only in order to, you know, incite them to mobilize to violence, but also, you know, and also intelligence gathering, and also, you know, building their own skills, you know, learning from these groups, you know, various things. And yeah, the people that I'm talking about, they want to start with the United States, right? And because they don't have the people, they have to use the media, you know, to kind of manipulate people, like mass perception, basically, in different ways. And they are very much targeting specific audiences, like just like the Islamic State did when they did different publications, right? So they had Amaq, which was their news thing, you know, and that was basically kind of, you know, those little short things when they did an attack, and you know, those were aimed basically towards like journalists, you know, and then you had the, you know, Rumia stuff, and those were aimed, you know, these beautiful graphics and all the stuff, and those were aimed at, you know, foreign people, but it was tailored to those countries. So not every edition was the same thing, right? And this, though, is much more kind of like, I don't know. It's how they can manipulate people to do certain things in a way that they know is going to provoke a specific response, right? So all of terrorism is just, you know, trying to provoke people to respond. But what the accelerationists are able to do is provoke people to respond in a predictable way, because they understand that these patterns are very predictable, right? Because they draw a lot from this Russian subfield of reflexive psychology, which is that, you know...
Reflexive control theory.
Yeah.
Is it kind of essentially based on like sort of a confirmation bias where we're going to see things the way we want? Like we have our structure built up, our belief structure built up, and then like our reticular activating system sees what
sort of. It's like a derivative of game theory, where they study the decision making process, which is partly emotional, cognitive. Like think about like in the military, like MDMP. So there's a the military decision making process, and it's like a whole graph chart. You can look it up; it's not secret. You can look it up, Google it if you don't know what I'm talking about. MDMP, or military decision making process. If you understand how we make decisions, it becomes a lot easier to stick information or disinformation somewhere in the middle of that process, knowing that that you will then on your own volition take a certain action, because they're just gaming this very like bureaucratic decision making process that we use to make decisions. And MDMP is just one. There's like many different processes we use in government.
Very interesting.
But yeah, no, I mean, it's right. That's exactly what they do. And it works every time, you know, because everyone's following these sort of scripts.
Right.
Because you do one thing, you know, attack a specific, I mean, you get a terrorist to attack a specific target using, let's say, an AR-15, right? And you know what's going to happen. You know, people are going to come out and say, well, you know, we want to ban the AR-15. And other people are going to say, no, don't ban the AR-15. You know, and they're going to get mad about it. And then they're going to say, oh, you're trying to take away our rights and stuff. And they're going to, you know, and it just builds up every time. And nobody ever does anything new, right? And so you're just sort of creating these situations, but it does a lot of other things. So because they're able to manipulate perceptions in various ways, they're also able to manipulate the conduits of how they're getting, you know, kind of their, I wouldn't say message out, but their, you know, their impact in, you know, so they can manipulate journalists, they can manipulate academics, just by, you know, doing, you know, various things. And then, you know, somebody will say, okay, well, this is what's happening now. here's you have someone who's extraordinary authoritative on, some some far right group, or someone who's, authoritative in terrorism in general.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And, they say, okay, here's what's happening. And then, next week or 2 days from now, somebody else is the new greatest threat ever.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So like today, these people are the worst thing we've ever seen.
ISIS.
And they're basically, ISIS mixed with Hitler, and it's awful. And then in 2 days, now we have these other people who are even worse,
Mm-hmm.
But it also, it undermines expertise, because, people are not only confused, you look kind of like a dumbass. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
my language. Saying that this is the biggest threat, and then it's,
I mean, I
totally inconsistent.
I make fun of them too. I mean, I can't. Maybe I'm taking the bait, right? But I look at some of these experts, and I was like, man, you guys were telling us 2 weeks ago the Boogaloo Boys were going to be like the downfall of America, and then you forget all about them, and you move on to some other group, and now they're the big bad guys we're all supposed to be worried about. It gets silly.
Well, yeah, and it also all feeds each other. So, for example, the incels, okay, the involuntary celibates, the guys who
that's another one.
Kind of gross chat rooms and stuff, talking about women and how they don't, they can't get laid and all this stuff. And now, and that was also a community that the accelerationists, infiltrated.
Right.
But one of the reasons that they infiltrated the incels is, first of all, because they're seen as so pathetic.
Mm-hmm.
Here are these guys that are not really, these incels are the lowest of the low on the social totem pole. They're constantly being, insulted by even people who are very low on the social totem pole. I mean, these guys are basically like the bottom, because they can't have sex with anybody, and they're not. It's not like they're going to propagate strong heirs to Western civilization, right? Like, these guys are totally disposable. They make men look bad or whatever, and the accelerationists think that it's funny.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because these guys are so pathetic and so easily manipulated.
Mm-hmm.
And so for a while, incels were the most dangerous thing. And I'm sure, we do have regularly, I mean, just recently, people who describe themselves as incels, carrying out an attack. But, it started because the accelerationists thought it was funny to get these guys to go kill themselves, and then have the response of, you get, the man who's, one of the godfathers of terrorism studies, who is, the director of counterterrorism at, the Council on Foreign Relations, saying that, the incels are terrorists and these are the worst terrorists ever, kind of thing. When most people pretty much just think that these guys are super pathetic, but now all of a sudden they are,
the next Nazi Germany.
Yeah. And it's interesting what you said too, because like you said, they know their conduits, that if a person wearing a balaclava, or carrying an umbrella commits a crime, it'll be on Fox all day long, but it won't be on CNN. If a person waving an American flag commits a crime or an act of violence, it'll be on CNN all day, but it won't be on Fox. Like, they know how to get their, their message
the buttons
out.
are like this big, like click.
Yeah.
Click.
Well, and what you also see is that so they don't share an ideology, but all of these different ideologies, and not just ideologies, but some of these identities, they all circle around myths.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, we'll take January 6th. If you listen to what a lot of those people, a lot of the people who attended and got, very rowdy at the Capitol, what they were saying, and they're talking about, the American Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can, there's a guy he's a French philosopher, and he helped to inspire Mussolini in terms of tactics kind of. Mussolini and Lenin both credited him to their success by using get people to buy into myths, and then they began to believe that they're kind of part of it, and it mobilizes them because he was trying to figure out. He started as a Marxist, and then that didn't work out, and so then he went to the fascists, and then he went kind of all over the place, just trying to basically prove his theory right. He didn't care what anybody said.
Are we talking about Gustav Le Bon?
Sure, what about him?
No, is that who you were referring to?
No, I'm talking about Georges Sorel.
Oh, okay. I was just curious because Hitler read Gustav Le Bon, and obviously he was very much into the myth making.
Yeah.
But no, well, please continue on that line of thought. I'm not familiar with him.
Oh, so Sorel, he has this book that if you are interested at all in militant accelerationism, you have to read Reflections on Violence. Okay, it's critical more than any other book.
Okay.
Obviously, it says nothing about accelerationism, but you will very much understand this. So Sorel first was trying to. So his thing was he wanted, what are the socialists, when everyone, the general strike. So he was interested in how do you get, we already have the people, who are mobilized, who, we can get them to do the general strike, but how do we get all the Marxists who are not mobilized do that when ideology isn't enough, right? So, you got the Maoists who were like, ideology is everything, this is how we're going to do it. But Sorel was like, well, you use myth to do it. And all these different, and whether it's the general strike for the communists, or whether it's, the dreams of heroism and warrior, whatever, with the fascists, or it's, for the incels of, finally, rising up against the system that's oppressing them and not redistributing the women for them or whatever. I mean, all these groups, and they have myths that at some level can be incorporated or meshed together because they all usually follow the same patterns in terms of archetypes. There's the hero, or there's it's different things that people associate with, and if you can bring them into the myth to the extent that they are part of it, you don't need them to believe in the same ideologies if they believe in the same myth, such as the myth of civil war. That a civil war is going to happen, and then if they believe in that myth, they will mobilize, right? Whether they believe it, in self-defense, or just even in their, reactions to believing that other people are going to commit a civil war, right? And so, when in January 6th, and you had a whole bunch of people who basically thought that they were the new, sort of Sons of Liberty, and whether or not they actually knew who the Sons of Liberty were. But I'm not sure how familiar people are, with what the tactics of the Sons of Liberty were, but, those were not, anonymous mobs of people that were causing all that damage at that, part of the American Revolution. You had the Sons of Liberty guys, kind of harnessing those mobs of people, to do certain things. And part of that was because they needed to maintain some sort of discipline. Because Sam Adams knew that if they had guys who were just sort of, if you had Le Bon talking about, the madness of crowds and people, this destructiveness of, these groups in their national, dynamics. But, Sam Adams knew that they couldn't just let, these crowds of people with that destructive dynamic, let them loose, right? Because any counterinsurgency person will tell you, that you need to have the local people on your side, and if you go burn down their, I don't know, barn and their cow goes somewhere, like they're not going to like you anymore. They're not going to support whatever you're up to, So, Sam Adams and the other, founders of, the Sons of Liberty in these different places, they were involved in reining that in while, obviously making the crowd the face of, the terror. And we have a difficult situation in the United States in that the modern concept of terrorism came from the French Revolution. All right. And that's also where the modern concept of ideology came from. But the thing is that the American Revolution obviously was, prior to that.
Yeah.
Right. So when you have people believing in the myth of the American Revolution, they very much, it can say this is part of our tradition. And then everyone else says, well, that is terrorism. Well, that's sort of difficult.
Because it was terrorism against the crown at that time.
Well, even insulting the crown was treason. Right. I mean, but the thing is that the crown didn't have any means of, doing that. But, but at the time, terrorism wasn't a thing. Terrorism wasn't a thing until the French Revolution. I mean, obviously terrorism has always been with us, but I mean, in terms of the modern concept of terrorism came from the American Revolution. And the modern concept of, even ideology came from the American Revolution. I mean, the French Revolution, sorry.
Jade, I want to hit you with a couple quick viewer questions here, and then I'd like to kind of maybe wrap up the show talking about what's that?
Actually, we missed one further up.
Okay.
Yeah, but you go ahead and finish that. You want to wrap up?
Well, we'll get to it. Let's hit the questions here.
And this is all very fascinating. It's very, very interesting stuff. But anyway, so Jim G, thanks, and sorry that we missed you on our first read through. As threats and priorities shift from Islamist terrorism to threats from China and Russia, how transferable are the skills you use to pursue ISIS? And then Moose Mouse, thank you very much, said, I second Jim G's question.
How transferable are the skills? I mean, the skills are fairly transferable, but you are also, when you're dealing with nation states, you're also dealing with different considerations than you deal with in counterterrorism, right? And a lot of countries, it's much easier for them to, to work together on counterterrorism, efforts because nobody likes terrorists, right? I mean, with some exceptions, with Pakistan and whatnot. But, for the most part, people can get behind the idea of getting rid of these people because they're subversives in, all over the place. But when you come in terms of, nation states, you come against a different kind of problem that's not so easily solved by some of these things and can actively make things worse. I think that there are a lot of transferable skills, and I think that if people can get authorizations to do various things, that's probably more important to them than who has the transferable skills. It's what are people, what are different teams kind of allowed to do that's going to be, effective, or what even is effective, and what are you trying to achieve, right? Because one of the things about the big stuff about, Russia and the countering influence operations. Well, okay, what are you trying to achieve? Like, how are we going to counter the information operations when you don't have a strategy related to Russia? Right? And in terms of, foreign policy. Okay. And obviously that's not the work of the intelligence agency or the military. Right. But if the, policy people can't agree on, okay, well, here's the approach that we want to take, to Russia, and here's our consensus and whatever. You have a very, very difficult time trying to figure out how, okay, then what are the objectives, and then how do we achieve the objectives? And it seems like there were really no objectives other than these very short-term things like, okay, everyone is a Russian spy,
right? And
everyone you see as a Russian spy is going to leave Facebook, right, or whatever. Okay. These are very, very short-term things. And then what?
And we've had like people from psychological operations on our show before, and they've said that one of the problems with countering that kind of propaganda, like Russian propaganda, any kind of propaganda, is that we have very strict laws in the United States about our own propaganda efforts on our people, and there's no way and
sometimes the policymakers don't even understand the laws in the first place, right, so that they're like exceeding what the law says,
right, and there's out of ignorance. No way that you can do like a counter propaganda sort of campaign that doesn't also influence U.S. population, which they're not allowed to do.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah, but what you can do is, for example, hijack their operations, mm-hmm, and manipulate their operations to go in, just totally mess them up. Mm-hmm. Which doesn't really do much about their propaganda. Your Uncle Bob is still gonna, probably be a flaming racist next Thanksgiving. He's gonna have some new material, courtesy of the Kremlin. It doesn't really, it's not, that sort of thing isn't,
some new software updates.
Right, exactly. The thing is that, right, like countering propaganda, it depends on what your objective is. Is the objective just to get rid of
bad ideas,
content on social media, or is the, is it to really give a firm hand to, to Russia, or is it, you want to, play softball with Russia, or what's going on? Because all of those different kinds of operations, like, how are you going to tailor those operations to the objectives you want to meet? But you can't do that if you have no very clear-cut objectives, and you need to have a strategy in order to get, the objectives. And so, I don't know. I don't know what they were doing, and no one was really asking what the strategy is. What is it exactly we're trying to achieve here?
All right. Well, they were too busy figuring that out for Afghanistan. So
I want to try to get through some of these questions here. Isaac asks, did you ever work at Pine Gap or any of the other Five Eyes network?
No.
He also asked, the public found out about Simone Biles' ADHD because of Russian hackers leaked her emails. Did the company, I guess you worked for, ever work to protect Olympic athletes?
Actually, well, we work to protect a lot of different big sporting events internationally.
Interesting.
But honestly, I wouldn't mind if the Russian hackers could hack into like some of my old Gmail email addresses, because I can't find the password anywhere. But yeah, no, we did protect big sporting events, but nothing related to like gymnastics.
Moose asks, how can we counter the acceleration and counter what is being put out, and as a common citizen to see through the noise and not fall for any foreign or domestic propaganda?
Well, as a normal citizen, I would say it's very, very difficult, because if the people in my field who fell for a lot of the accelerationist stuff were also, very much participating in a Russian, psychological operation against the United States, while, kind of extolling the other people who were participating in a Russian psychological operation against the United States, and none of that was great. You know what I mean? It just gets very stupid very quickly, because you have people who are like absolute authorities, and they're absolutely brilliant, but they come from a very specific background in that they're very sort of positivistic, that yeah, so how does a normal person get good information, basically? I'm not entirely sure, but I think that the lack of confidence and trust in expertise is directly contributing to the rise of conspiracy theories. Because if you have people who don't, if you're eroding, and this is part of what accelerationists aim to do, they want to erode expertise because they understand that when people don't know what is true and what is not true, or when people think that that experts or whoever have dubious motives or ulterior motives or aren't necessarily dedicated to truth, they tend to either look elsewhere to try to find information to update their beliefs, or because the alternative is, what are you going to do? You're just going to listen to what other people say and then just sort of believe it. So you have these two options, and it's sort of like, kind of like an arbitrage thing that the conspiracy theorists, the accelerationists, can take advantage of in terms of people delving into these conspiracies. And once they sort of delve into this, world, it becomes easier for them to manipulate. I don't know what the normal person should do. I think that people who believe that, who don't believe in populism, who don't believe that, all people know the same things about, that everyone can be an expert. I don't believe that. I think that it takes a lot of dedication, and it takes a lot of, of knowledge, stuff that you can't just Google, right? Like, it takes a lot to actually get, expertise in a certain, thing. And for all those people who are conduits, they can become, more useful in not being conduits, but it does demand, acknowledging that you may very well get played, right? Or like, and if you don't correct your efforts, you're going to continue to get played because you are very specifically a target of these guys who are trying to bring down the United States. And by doing that, you are then also involved in that, not wittingly, or not, maybe you don't care enough to figure it out or to believe it or do your own research or anything like that on it. But the people who have a responsibility for public trust need to uphold the public trust. And the way that people have been operating is just not satisfactory. It's just, there's a lot of different things. And I don't think that should be on the normal citizen, right? Because the normal citizen has stuff to do.
It's like, it's an unrealistic expectation almost.
Totally unrealistic, and they should be able to trust their experts. Period. They should be able to trust their journalists. Period. They shouldn't be wondering if there is, some political spin going on, or if, there's something that, whatever. All these different things, and some of them are, on purpose. Some of them are, unwitting. Some of them are just sort of negligence. There's all these different reasons why things could happen, but they could very easily change, but people don't want to change, right? And it's very easy to criticize people. It's very easy to criticize particularly partisan opponents for things and just totally omit any responsibility for your own actions and for how your actions reflect on other people, because it's not just the erosion of one expert when they are immediately contradicted by reality, right? If you have a whole bunch of like people bandwagoning on top of a particular narrative, for example, like lone wolf white supremacy, and then immediately you're contradicted by accelerationist, bringing out a black supremacist or whatever, right? And normal people, you can say, okay, well, the black supremacy is rooted in white supremacy, and all black on black violence is rooted in white supremacy, and all black on Asian violence is white supremacy. And that is definitely a view that people hold. But it's a minority view. Mm-hmm. And in the United States, it's overall, it's a very minority view.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and it's like you say, like that people need to have faith in their experts, but people don't have to go very far, whether they're on the left or the right. To find the experts like doing a disservice to the expertise or operating whether it's partisan or whatever else. So people on both sides lose faith in that whole process.
Well, like when I started studying accelerationism, militant accelerationism, nobody was studying acceleration. Like I said, people thought that I was crazy. Because they were all focused very, very narrowly on white supremacy. And, the idea that people could, that there was other things going on was just either inconceivable or way too inconvenient. Mm-hmm. And to be like, I didn't really want to do that. I had given through kind of enough with ISIS that at a certain point I was like, you know what, I don't want to do this. This sucks. Here I am going to go devote all this time and all this effort for very little, return, and only pretty much bad things, because people try to ruin my reputation and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, again, it was similar to the rationale for some of this ISIS stuff, in that we have so many people who are just not going to do what needs to be done. Mm-hmm. There are very few people. They're not going to do what needs to be done, even when it's not detrimental to them. Mm-hmm. Even when they're maybe marginally incentivized to do so. But particularly when it's not advantageous for them to do so. Particularly when it's a lot of work and they have to contradict their colleagues, and it's so much easier just to sort of go along with things and say, well, it's not that not that important or whatever. But like I said, I've never been more terrified than sitting there realizing some of the things that these people were up to and having no one in the world who believed me. And I spoke to people. I tried to get people to help. I'm just in the terrorism, intelligence community, but also, researchers, also, fairly well-known, foreign policy, think tank people who I know and who knew me, and who knew that I wasn't a conspiracy theorist, who nonetheless thought that I was then a conspiracy theorist. And nobody would, nobody took it seriously at all. Until continuously everyone's hypotheses were just repeatedly, blown to bits by what was going on, and by then people were very much struggling to keep up with the accelerationism stuff, because nobody had cared to look into it at all or do their own research about it. And so they ended up just sort of copying, pasting things that they read on the internet and got totally confused about different things. But for me, it was a conscious choice not to start publishing immediately some of these things, because I'm well aware that I could very easily become a conduit to things spiraling out of control, unless people are more, sensitive to how their actions, are very serious. And, I think we've all probably had, friends die in conflict zones over things that were less important than this, especially to the security of the United States. And there was nobody who, believed in it. And I said, these people want, to cause an insurrection. And then they had the, January 6th thing, and they're like, oh, no, this is an insurrection or whatever. I'm like, this isn't, okay. Like, first of all, you guys didn't believe me for, like, a very long time, 2 years. And for the first, it wasn't until about, I don't know, maybe 9 months into doing accelerationism research that I finally found some people who believed me, because they had, done different things, and things that I was saying made sense to them. But all the other people still did not believe me and didn't really believe them, and kind of thought we were all nuts, but at least I wasn't nuts alone, right? But what they're trying to do is very effective. And I'm not saying that, they're responsible for all of the stuff that's going on.
Right.
But I'm saying they're using it to their definite advantage. And so when you have people, on January 6th who say, okay, this is an insurrection. Well, first of all, that's not really the insurrection. That is, a provocation to get people to believe, and the people on the ground too, to believe that they are part of a revolution. But also, more importantly than that, to get everyone else to believe that there is an impending civil war. Right? And that is the myth that they're trying to perpetuate. And that's a myth that they've been trying to perpetuate for a long time, going into these communities, trying to, stir up people to believe that there's going to be an impending civil war, because if you get the myth, you can mobilize people.
All right. It was a pretty piss poor insurrection if they forgot their guns. I mean, an insurrection sort of has to have some teeth, doesn't it?
I mean, it sounds better than, there are technical, definitions to what an insurrection is. And then there are technical, distinctions from what a revolution is, right? Like an insurrection is the very start of a failed revolution. I mean, it is most effectively quelled by, very kind of harsh law enforcement and security. Just literally And
I mean, to my knowledge, no one's actually been charged with insurrection. So I think even DOJ does not think that
they're getting charged on fairly minor
trespassing and things. So Alex says, did you work with private cybersecurity companies during any of your government roles?
Did I personally did not. I know of some. I personally did not.
All right. Dominic is asking your thoughts about Yuri Bezmenov.
I don't have any comments or thoughts on Yuri Bezmenov.
Geez, this thing skips around. How does the myth of America's founding as a Christian nation play into accelerationism today? I think you covered that a little bit. Any quick thoughts on that?
As a Christian nation, I think, I first want to make very clear that a lot of the people who are believing in these myths are believing in things that never actually happened. So the American Revolution, a lot of what was written about it was not true. It was very much colored by some of these writings that were intended for entertainment. And so there was a lot of myth making around the American Revolution on purpose at the time. And so how does this play into, America as a Christian nation in terms of Christian nationalism? I assume that's what you mean. There's definitely people who have, tried to incite, Christian nationalists, and other kinds of, various kinds of nationalists. Do I think that, that the accelerations are particularly important about the Christian nationalists? No, but I think that that's a wedge that they can use, that Christianity is a wedge that they can use, just in the sense that, Islam in various ways is a wedge that they can use. And so is Judaism. And, they're going to use what they have available, and they're very creative. And we're not, and it's not a matter of the government being inflexible this time. It's a matter of, kind of the public immediately responding to the different, stimuli.
Max,
like Pavlovian dog response thing.
Matt asks, how do investigators differentiate between hostile actions and constitutional grassroots advocacy efforts?
I mean, that sounds like more of a question for the FBI. I said, that's not really my role. And, I take a much more, I would say, open approach to free speech in that, I don't really care what you believe in. Mm-hmm. You can have the worst beliefs ever. But unless and I might think that you're absolutely like a dirtbag, and I might absolutely not want anything to do with you, but I'm not going to believe that you're a terrorist unless you start acting like a terrorist. Mm-hmm. Unless you are interested in violence to overthrow the United States, to kill innocent people, to be actually a terrorist, that's the only interest that I have. So I don't care what you believe in. I do not care if you are the far right. I don't care if you are the far left. I don't care if you are QAnon. I don't care. Right? It doesn't matter to me.
Isaac asks,
I don't run into those issues.
Why didn't our enemies hack us when we were at our weakest during the pandemic, like this, like the supply shortage crisis or the hospitals? So, I guess why didn't they hack into our medical infrastructure during the pandemic?
Well, I suppose you would have to ask them. But, why didn't they hack into the,
I guess I think that's what he's asking. I know that's maybe a little bit outside of what your normal,
Yeah, I would say you'd have to ask them why they didn't do it. Maybe they got sick. Maybe they were lazy.
James,
but also, people have been saying for several years, particularly Josh Corman who was at the Atlantic Council. He was one of the first voices, saying we need to protect particularly cybersecurity in the healthcare sector. But yeah, that's not really my area. So I'm going to leave that to people who actually know what they're.
James Bridges says, "How about something fun? Have you ever come across something you were sure was a conspiracy, but were dumbfounded when it turned out to be true?"
Oh, that's a good question. So not quite like that, but I find it really interesting when I'm studying this stuff to instead, I don't like to read secondary sources about stuff until I've read the primary sources. And that's sort of backwards. Because a lot of people don't even bother reading the primary sources. So when it comes to conspiracy theories, I really like to sort of trace them back. Like, where do they come from? Where do these ideas come from? And it's really kind of interesting, to see how they could have evolved and how did this start? Is it just people, being prejudiced against the Jews, or prejudiced against, the Council on Foreign Relations, or prejudiced against, whoever, right? Mm-hmm. Or is there something more interesting? And a lot of times it's really more interesting. I'm not saying that the conspiracies are true. Most of them are not true. You'd say that. But there are elements of truth. And that's what makes them convincing to people, right? And it's those elements of truth that I find very interesting. The sort of the history behind those things, but those are also the kinds of things that if I was a conspiracy theorist, I would say, oh my gosh, because this is true,
right?
Then what's not to say that this other stuff isn't true, right? And because it adds credibility, and right. That's kind of what you need. But that's also something that I find is very interesting, and that's a whole bunch of different kinds of conspiracy theories.
This will be the last one I take, because I know we're capitalizing a lot of your time here, Jade. I appreciate you waiting into the night with us.
Fascinating stuff.
Mitch asks, does your guest think that Malcolm Nance has more or less accurately described some of these recent influence campaigns that you've been tracking?
I know Malcolm, and Malcolm is a really nice guy. I don't always agree with his analysis, and I have to say that I don't watch MSNBC. So you're going to have to ask someone else.
Jade, we have just kind of like scratched the surface of this topic, and I'm always fascinated by these conversations with you, and we could keep going for like another 3 hours. I won't do that to you. I will just say, is there anything to sort of wrap up this conversation, final thoughts that maybe I failed to ask, or Dave or the viewers failed to ask, that you would like to get out there before we wrap up tonight's episode?
Oh my gosh.
To put a little bow tie on it, I don't know.
I'm not sure. Well, in terms of what, accelerationism, or in terms of Islamic State?
You're asking me? I don't know. You're the expert.
Oh, well, I don't know if to take that as a compliment or an insult, but I will. I'll think about that. What I would say is that, above everything else, don't ever accept just things that people tell you at face value. Even if they say that they're, an expert, and they may well be an expert, I'm not saying you need to do your own research, but it's these reflexive tendencies that tend to get us in trouble, even, in terms of, partisan responses, or whatever. And a lot of that, can be fed by, the stuff that you believe and the people that you surround yourself with, and just sort of automated, responses. And you may be totally well-meaning, but people are also, can see these patterns and can manipulate you, and can manipulate the people that you're listening to. And if you are not more aware of kind of what everybody, that you are vulnerable. Everybody's vulnerable. I'm vulnerable to it. The two hosts are vulnerable to it. Everybody.
Yeah.
There's nobody who is completely self-aware all the time, and who doesn't have any automatic sort of trigger points. But it becomes dangerous when those trigger points are all the same, and everyone is responding the same way, and isn't really thinking that maybe this is not the best approach, or maybe there's another approach, or maybe we should stop sort of butting heads kind of on demand. So that's basically what I was saying.
And there are smart people on both sides, or on all sides, and you wonder how, when you're on the other side, you wonder, how can this smart person believe this thing?
Right. Yeah.
But yeah.
No, and yeah, I mean, I'm not particularly, political. Well, I'm a very independent thinker. So even my politics, I'm going to piss people off. Everybody's going to get pissed off. So that's a really joy that I, sort of have. But I think that people have some of the same end. People at the end of the day want to protect their families, and some of the stuff is very basic. In that basic in the terms of it triggers the same parts of the brain. So whether it's, shutting down small businesses, like for COVID, for example, shutting down small businesses, it's going to trigger parts of the brain for people who are dependent on, certain industries to feed their families. And that is the same exact, kind of place in the brain that the people who are trying to protect their families, who want everyone to stay inside indefinitely and wear masks, whatever, both sides are getting the same parts of their brain triggered, like the I can't remember this part, but it's the the lizard part, the old one, that is about survival, and so you may not realize that the person that you're most fiercely fighting with is fighting as fiercely as you for the same reason, in just a response to something different. It's something different that triggers that for them. I think that people don't necessarily need to get along with each other. I think people just really, honestly, the best choice is to just sort of live with hatred, kind of. Learn how to live among people that you hate. Basically, because until you can actually see them as, people that you don't necessarily need to be your adversaries, if you can just sort of coexist with people who can believe things that you absolutely find abhorrent, then you can't de-escalate because you can't build any kind of relationship whatsoever if that's all there is, because nobody wants to be in a room where somebody, is constantly attacking them. And that's whether, verbally or physically or whatever, or calling them names like they're a Nazi or they're, a communist or whatever. Nobody likes that.
And you're constantly seen as like a zero-sum game where it's an existential crisis. It's how can a society continue like that? It's really the question. And, Jade, I'd love to continue this conversation with you again sometime in the future. I know I'm like dragging you towards midnight here, and I really appreciate your time. And thank you to everyone who watched the show live tonight and will, in the subsequent days. I want to let you know that next week is going to be, we're going to have Christina and Ryan Hillsberg on the show. They were a husband and wife team serving in the CIA. So they will be on next Friday. I hope to see you guys there. And in the meantime, I hope you'll like, share, and subscribe to the channel.
Yeah, and do you where can people find your work, your articles and whatnot?
Well, things that I publish are on GNet, one of the articles that Jack shared. It's part of the King's College London. They do a lot of great work on terrorist use of the internet and terrorist and technology stuff. So you can find me there. You can find me, different places. At the moment, I'm not publishing, and I like I said, I'm not really big in the public spotlight type stuff, and I try to err on the side of caution when it comes to particularly trying to be a conduit or whatever. But hopefully, I'll try to publish more.
I think
I hope you will.
Just want to know
really.
Are you still on Twitter?
Oh yeah! Oh my God! I yell at people all the time. Yeah, you wouldn't believe the bad opinions people have on the internet.
Oh,
it's unbelievable.
Oh, we would believe them. We would absolutely believe them. Jade, it's been a real pleasure. We deeply appreciate you coming on and sharing your story and your thoughts with us.
Well, thank you for having me. And I was deeply appreciative that Jack came to my fire instructor class that I said. This was very much he had tried to get me on here before, and I had, sort of said, maybe I'll think about it. And then I said, after he came to my class, he said, I said, I owe you a favor. And I did owe him a favor. And he said, oh, great. Now I'm going to get you on the show. And so here I am.
I'll send you memes and GIFs until you agree to it. And the harassment just goes on and on.
Yeah, I know. I mean, the things that I do for the fire department, unbelievable. Right? Unbelievable. Okay. All right. Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, we have one last question. And as a person donated for this, just let me ask you: social media is biased, cable news is biased. Where can average people find accurate information about current events? Where do you get your information? Okay.
I try to. Well, I go to credible sources, but. I don't know. I mean, where do I get my terrorism research? I do it myself. Mm-hmm. And I, obviously, like, there are things that are more credible and things that are less credible. But I don't know. I think we have a really toxic information environment right now.
So
I think there really aren't a lot of places that you can trust, unequivocally. I think that it's very much, discretion, because sometimes, Fox has more, accurate information. Sometimes CNN has more accurate information. Sometimes, MSNBC has some, accurate information, or BBC or whatever. I tend to.
I think the question itself is flawed, isn't it? I mean, there is no guru you can go to for the truth.
I would say Jade is the guru that you go to for the truth. Everybody follow her on Twitter and read her articles.
Thank you.
That's where you'll find your accurate.
I very much agree. Well, I don't think that there should be an arbiter of truth.
Right.
And I think that, a lot of people do believe that they, not only there should be arbiters of truth, but that they are the arbiter of truth. And I believe that people, we should have experts, and experts should be trusted, but experts should also be worthy of the trust that they ask. Mm-hmm. And I think that we are failing on a lot of different levels. And it's not just, it's not, you can't blame any specific group in society when everyone's sort of in it together and causing a mess in their own capacity. So, I'm hoping that at some point we can start, restoring these things, because otherwise the accelerationists are getting exactly what they want, and they are then incentivized to continue their violence, to manipulate, because they know that it works, and it does work. And I'm hoping that at some point it'll be less effective.
Well, thank you again, Jade.
Thanks. Amazing.
Really appreciate your time. And again, I don't know what favors I'm going to have to do next time, but I would love to have you back on the show at some point in the future to further discuss some of these topics. And I think that's it. And we will see you guys